Hey guys, welcome to Michelle's STEM Journey. I am Michelle and I'm here today with another AMC Problem of the Week video. This week's video comes from the year 2012, 10A, Problem 14, and it deals with geometry. I hope you all enjoyed this video and let's get started. The problem states, Chubby makes non-standard checkerboards that have 31 squares on each side. The checkerboards have a black square in every corner and alternate red and black squares along every row and column. How many black squares are there on such a checkerboard? Okay, so I have drawn the checkerboard right here, and obviously it's not 31 squares, but it's just an example. And to start off the question, we're just going to look at the first row. So we see here that we start with a black square and end with a black square. And so this basically tells us that we are going to have one extra or one more black square than red squares because we have 31 squares on each side. So that means that it's an odd number. And so let's just get rid of an end square first. So let's just pretend that we're going to get rid of that square. And that means that we have 30 squares remaining, and so we have 15 black squares and 15 red squares. But this is just for this section. And don't forget, we did cross out an end square, which happens on this row to be a black square. So that means that we have to add that square back. So on the first row, we would have 15 plus 1, which is 16 black squares. And if we see the pattern here, this applies to every other row because every other row starts with a black square and ends with a black square. So then that means that, for example, this row would also have 16 black squares, and then so would this row, and so on. But now let's look at the second row. So here we see we start with a red square and end with a red square. So we're just going to do the same thing that we did just a few seconds ago. So cross out the end square, and we see that we have 15 black squares and 15 red squares, excluding the end square. And on this row, we don't need to add 1 to the 15 black squares because the end square that we cut off, that is a red square. So that means that we don't need that one. So this row would just stay with 15 black squares. And again, it applies to every other row. So this row would also have 15 black squares and then 15 black squares on that row and so on. So now we have figured out the number of black squares on each row, but how many rows are there for 16 black squares and 15 black squares? Well, it's kind of the same thing. We see here that because there are 31 rows, that means that when we get rid of the first row, so for example, just this row, if you cross this one out, that means that it gives us 30 remaining rows. So we have 15 rows that start and end with red. And then we have 15 rows start and end with black. However, don't forget that we did take off one of the rows, this one that we crossed out right here, and so we need to add that back. So therefore, we have still 15 rows starting and ending with red, and then now we have actually 16 rows starting and ending with black because the one that we just added starts and ends with black. And so these are just the number of rows, and then we also have the number of black squares in each row figured out. So that means that we just have to multiply these two together. So we would have 16 times 16 plus 15 times 15. And so this gives us 481. And so therefore the answer is B, 481.